The grand chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so loud, yet beneath the noise there was something cold. A silence hidden inside the fear, a silence that had been waiting for 100 years. Across the long curved hall, lights shimmered on glass floors, reflecting the banners of 1,000 empires. Voices rose in a dozen languages, sharp and proud, echoing off the dome of crystal that hung above them. The topic was the same as it had always been: the humans. Some called them extinct. Others whispered that they had gone into hiding, rebuilding their strength in the dark. No one knew, and that was what terrified them. Then, just as the debates reached their peak, all the screens flickered. Every light dimmed. The room fell into stillness as a single transmission cut through the noise, spreading across every channel, every frequency, every corner of the galaxy. 3 words appeared, glowing white against black: "We offered peace." For a few seconds, no one moved. The phrase repeated once, twice, then again, its tone calm, almost mournful. Yet behind it there was something that made even the oldest species shiver. The High Speaker, a tall being of glass and light, turned toward her advisors, her voice sharp and uneasy. "Who sent that signal?" she demanded. The technicians scrambled at their consoles, but the signal didn't trace back to any known relay. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "It carries an ancient Terran encryption," one of them said quietly, his tendrils shaking. The room filled with a low murmur, and then someone laughed, a short, nervous sound that spread like wildfire. Within moments, the chamber was alive again with mockery. "Humans," scoffed a delegate from the Fourth Dominion. "Ghosts don't send messages." Others joined in, calling it a trick, a prank by rebels, an echo from a dead system. But the older ones did not laugh. In the farthest corner of the chamber, the elder of the Keth Dominion sat motionless. His species had fought beside the humans during the War of Unity. He remembered the way Terran ships had moved, silent, patient, unstoppable. He remembered their eyes, calm even as fire consumed entire worlds. "Turn it off," the High Speaker ordered, trying to sound composed. The technicians obeyed, but the message would not stop. Every time they silenced one transmission, another appeared. "We offered peace." The words echoed across every screen, every datapad, even inside personal implants. Some delegates screamed, clutching their heads as the signal whispered in their minds, repeating over and over, "We offered peace." The High Speaker slammed her staff against the ground, the sound booming through the hall. "End the interference," she shouted, her voice shaking now. "Find its source." But no one could. The encryption was ancient, older than the Council itself, and written in a language that their systems barely recognized. One of the younger aides whispered, "It's human standard, but it's been modified. There are codes within the message, hidden commands." Another aide turned pale, "It's rewriting our data systems." Panic spread. The message wasn't just words, it was alive, weaving through their technology like veins of fire, breathing through the very circuits of their civilization. The lights flickered again, and for a heartbeat the entire chamber plunged into darkness. When the light returned, the Council's main screen displayed an image, a planet of blue and white. Earth. It rotated slowly in silence, clouds drifting lazily over its surface. Below the image, a single sentence appeared, glowing faintly, "You asked for silence." We obeyed. The delegates froze. Even the High Speaker's voice failed her for a moment. "Impossible," she whispered. "That world was quarantined after the war. No signal can leave it." But as she spoke, the hologram of Earth zoomed closer. The continents shimmered, and the words beneath changed again. "You called it peace. We called it mercy." The silence that followed was heavier than any weapon. No one laughed this time. The High Speaker gestured sharply to Admiral Vora of the Keth Dominion, who stood like a shadow near the edge of the platform. "Admiral," she said, forcing calm into her voice, "you fought beside them. Tell us what this means." The Admiral's golden eyes reflected the glow of the hologram. His voice was low, steady, but there was something in it that chilled everyone who heard it. "It means," he said, "they're awake." The room erupted. Delegates shouted over one another, some calling for fleets, others for diplomacy. One of the younger races, proud and impatient, stood and hissed, "They're just humans. They bleed like any of us." Vora turned his gaze toward the speaker, his expression unreadable. "So did the last 12 empires who said that," he murmured. The hall went quiet again. Someone from the archives stepped forward, trembling. "There is something else," she said softly. "A pattern in the transmission. It matches the old Terran war code, the same one used before the final battle of the War of Unity." She hesitated, swallowing hard. "The phrase 'we offered peace,' it's their prelude signal." The High Speaker stared at her. "Prelude?" "Before they declare action," the archivist whispered, "they send that message once. Only once." The hall filled with the sound of many voices, confused, afraid, angry. The younger races couldn't understand, but the elders remembered. They remembered how Earth's fleets had appeared out of nowhere, black ships that moved without lights, without sound, cutting through entire armadas like shadows through glass. The High Speaker gripped her staff until it cracked. "Enough," she said. "We cannot afford superstition. Send a verification fleet to Sol. I want confirmation that this isn't a trick." The order rippled through the room, but even as she spoke, her voice shook slightly. Across the galaxy, thousands of worlds watched the same broadcast unfold on their screens. Every station, every ship, every colony received the same haunting message. Those 3 words, repeated endlessly, written in every language known to the stars. "We offered peace." It reached miners on distant moons, soldiers in orbiting ships, farmers on colony worlds. Even those who didn't know what it meant felt something stir in their bones, an instinctive fear, like the memory of thunder. In a small observation post orbiting a red dwarf, 2 technicians watched the transmission in silence. One of them, a young woman from a world that had never known war, whispered, "What happens if it's real?" The other, older and tired, didn't look up from the screen. "Then the galaxy's about to remember what silence sounds like," he said. Back in the council chamber, the High Speaker dismissed the assembly, but she didn't move from her seat. The hologram of Earth still floated before her, spinning slowly, its blue oceans shimmering like glass. She leaned forward, whispering to no one, "What are you trying to tell us?" The screen flickered again, and for a brief moment, the hologram changed. A human face appeared, unmoving, eyes closed, lips calm. The image lasted only a second before vanishing, but it was enough to send a chill through her veins. Because those eyes, those calm, steady eyes, did not look like those of a dead race. They looked patient, waiting. In the archives below the chamber, the old war records began to unlock on their own. Files once sealed by order of the First Council flickered to life. There were images of Earth's fleets, massive, black as night, built not for conquest but for correction. Videos of destroyed worlds, not burned by weapons but erased by precision. Cities dismantled, not bombed. Audio logs from captured officers whispered the same phrase again and again. "They didn't fight us. They simply stopped us." The archivists stared at the screens, horrified. "They didn't just end wars," one of them whispered, "they ended histories." On a distant world, the verification fleet prepared to depart. Thousands of ships gleamed under the light of their star, banners fluttering, their commanders laughing at the superstition of the old. The admiral of the fleet, proud and young, sent one last message to the council before departure. "If the humans are still alive, we'll remind them who governs peace." But in the dark heart of space, far beyond the reach of any sensor, something ancient stirred. Old satellites, hidden for centuries, turned toward the stars again. Their lenses glowed red as they began to track the approaching fleet. Back in the council's grand hall, the High Speaker felt a faint vibration through the floor, a sound no one else noticed, a low hum, almost musical. She frowned, looking up at the hologram of Earth one last time. The oceans shimmered. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard a voice, soft and calm, whispering from across the void, "We offered peace." She froze, her chest tightening, her mind whispering a thought she dared not say aloud. What if this time, they're done offering? And somewhere, Deep beneath Earth's surface, in the black silence of forgotten bunkers, old machines came to life. Red lights blinked on ancient consoles. A voice, human, calm, unhurried, spoke for the first time in 100 years. Signal received. They heard us. Protocol Aurora is authorized. Above the planet, one of the old Terran satellites adjusted its orbit. It transmitted a single pulse into deep space, a call not of war, but of remembrance. Across the void, the pulse rippled outward, and every ancient relay that still bore the mark of humanity flickered to life, one by one, their lights glowing faintly like candles in the dark. And though no sound could travel through the void, if one could listen closely, the message would have been clear. It was not a threat, not a declaration, but a reminder written in the cold language of the stars. We offered peace. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy began to wonder what would come after those words. The council chamber was restless long after the transmission ended, its cold metal walls reflecting the tension of 1,000 alien hearts beating faster than reason could steady. Hours had passed, yet the words still echoed through every mind. We offered peace, soft but heavy, like the ghost of a promise no one had wanted to keep. The high speaker sat alone on the central dais, her fingers trembling against the carved edge of her staff. She had seen countless wars, countless treaties, but never before had 3 simple words unmade the pride of so many worlds. The delegates had scattered in confusion, some whispering that it was an elaborate hoax, others insisting it was a warning, and beneath all the voices, one truth burned through. The galaxy was afraid again, afraid of the silence they had mocked for too long. Outside the chamber, the corridors were alive with rumor, aides and officers rushing from console to console as new reports poured in. The message from Earth had not just reached the Council. It had reached everyone, from the mining colonies near Orion to the trade fleets at the edge of the Carven sector. And worse, it had reached the Outer Sentinels, ancient defense networks that had not activated since the War of Unity. Their systems were now humming faintly, responding to the same frequency. As the human signal, the analysts worked desperately to decode it. But the encryption was unlike anything seen before, not military, not political, not even digital. It was biological. The code structure matched neural patterns. It was as if the message was meant to be felt, not read. The high speaker finally stood, her reflection flickering across the polished floor as she walked toward the large window that overlooked the Council's capital world. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the glass, calm and cold, indifferent to the panic of those who lived beneath them. She whispered to herself, "Why now?" And her voice cracked. The last time humanity had spoken, the galaxy had been broken in half. They had tried to make peace then too, sending envoys, offering reconstruction, offering mercy, but the younger species had seen weakness instead of grace. They had attacked the Sol colonies, seeking to control the humans' technology, and what followed had been known forever after as the War of Silence. It lasted only 8 days that erased 12 worlds, and then humanity vanished, closing their borders, cutting all communication, leaving nothing but a single warning across every frequency. Do not disturb our silence. Now, after a century of that silence, they had spoken again, and those who remembered the last time could feel the weight of history pressing against their chests. Admiral Vora stood outside the chamber doors, his uniform heavy with old medals that no longer shone, his golden eyes dull, his voice low as he spoke to his aide. "They'll send a fleet," he said quietly. "They always do." The aide hesitated. "Do you think Earth will fight back?" The Admiral looked toward the hologram of the blue planet still glowing faintly on the nearest screen. "They don't fight," he said, "they end things." Inside the chamber, the Council reconvened, the delegates shouting across the hall, demanding action. The representative from the Dralith Empire slammed his clawed hand against the table. "We can't let this continue. They're using old Terran technology to breach our networks. It's an act of war." The speaker raised her voice above the noise. "We don't even know if they're alive." But even as she said it, her words sounded hollow. Everyone knew better. The youngest delegate, a bright-eyed scholar from the Nether Union, spoke timidly. "Maybe they're asking for peace again." Laughter erupted, sharp and bitter. "Peace?" snarled a Carthan general. "You weren't born when they last offered peace. You didn't see what their peace looked like." He leaned forward, his eyes burning. "When humanity says peace, the stars go dark." The speaker slammed her staff against the floor, the sound echoing through the hall, silencing them all. "Enough," she said firmly. Though her voice shook, "Fear will not rule this council again. We will act, but we will act with control." She turned toward the command pit. "Assemble a verification fleet." Her aide hesitated. "Madam Speaker, the last time—" "I know what happened the last time," she interrupted sharply. "This time will be different. We are stronger now, united, organized. The humans have been silent for a century. Their technology is outdated, their fleets dismantled, their systems dying. We will send a message of strength." Her words sounded confident, but her hands betrayed her. They were shaking. In the command centers across the Council's territory, orders were sent to mobilize the largest reconnaissance fleet since the war. Nearly 2,000 ships drawn from 12 different empires. The admirals were confident, some even eager. They saw Earth not as a threat but as an opportunity. If the humans truly had relic technology left behind, it would be priceless. Some whispered of mining Sol, others of annexing the Terran homeworld itself, but none of them noticed the faint pulse that spread through their systems as the orders were transmitted, a low rhythmic signal hidden beneath the communication codes. It repeated 3 times and then stopped. A dormant frequency that only one type of system in the galaxy could recognize: human satellites. On the dark edge of Sol, where light from the sun was only a faint memory, something old woke. Hundreds of dormant satellites came online. Their surfaces black as obsidian, absorbing starlight until they were invisible. They began to transmit, not to the Council, not to the fleet, but to each other, creating a web of energy that spread across the solar system, from Mercury's shadow to the moons of Neptune. Deep beneath the frozen crust of Europa, ancient Terran machines stirred, their cores warming for the first time in a century, and far below Earth's surface, in the catacombs of Terran Command, red lights began to flicker across vast empty halls. A voice, calm and human, echoed through the stillness. External signal received, pattern recognized, designation. Intrusion. The sound of machinery filled the silence as automated systems activated one after another. Initiating observation protocol, the voice continued. Message repeat authorized. Transmit on all channels. And across the galaxy, for the second time that day, every screen, every console, every communication link lit up with the same 3 words. We offered peace. This time, there was no laughter, only fear. On distant worlds, citizens gathered in silence as the message burned across the skies. In deep space colonies, soldiers froze at their posts, their hands trembling over their controls, and in the council chamber, the high speaker sank slowly back into her seat, staring at the repeating words, her heart heavy with the thought she couldn't speak aloud. They're not warning us. They're reminding us. Admiral Vora approached the center of the hall, his voice low but steady. If you send that fleet, he said, you won't hear from them again. The speaker's eyes flicked toward him, defiant. We can't show fear. He met her gaze. Then you'll show extinction. For a moment, the two stared at each other, the silence between them thick, until the speaker turned away, whispering, dispatch them anyway. And as her words were carried through the halls of power, across the networks of the galaxy, the human satellites continued to pulse, not in anger, but in sorrow, their silent rhythm echoing through space like a heartbeat, like a memory of something that had once tried to save the stars and had been betrayed for it. In the void between worlds, the verification fleet began its journey towards Sol, its engines cutting through the dark like blades of light. Inside the lead ship, the young admiral smiled, confident and unafraid. We'll bring them to the table, he said, and this time, they'll listen. But deep within the silent oceans of Earth, something vast began to stir, the water trembling with a pulse that traveled down to the planet's very core, and a voice, old as humanity itself, whispered through the dark, no, this time, they will hear. The fleet entered Sol with arrogance carved into every beam of its hull, thousands of ships gliding through the black like predators searching for prey. The commanders laughed as they passed the outer planets, their scanners sweeping over the barren rocks and silent moons. They saw nothing, no weapons, no transmissions, no sign of life. To them it was confirmation that humanity truly was finished. Their reports filled with triumph before the first shot was ever fired. The humans are ghosts, said one captain over the comms. Their silence was surrender. And across the fleet came laughter, the kind that only the ignorant could manage. But beneath that laughter, something ancient listened. Vorin, the admiral leading the expedition, stood in the command deck of his flagship, his golden uniform gleaming beneath the cold blue lights. He was young, proud, raised on the legends of human cruelty. The way they had burned worlds to stop wars, he didn't believe those stories. He thought the myths made to frighten weaker minds. As the fleet neared the orbit of Jupiter, he stared at the glowing planet and said quietly, "We'll send a message of our own. We'll show the Council that Earth's ghosts were never gods." His second officer hesitated, glancing nervously at the sensors. "Sir, our instruments are unstable, unstable." Voron replied, frowning, "Define unstable." The officer swallowed hard. "We're picking up faint signals, gravitational distortions across the asteroid belt. But no ships, no readings that match any known technology." Voron leaned forward. "Then it's just debris. Ignore it." But it wasn't debris. In the shadow of Ceres, one of the oldest mining colonies from before the War of Unity, a silent shape drifted, black against the stars, its surface absorbing every photon, invisible to any scanner that didn't know what to look for. When the fleet's ships passed, it awoke, no engines, no light, only a pulse. A deep vibration that spread across the void like the slow beat of a heart. One by one, the other shapes answered, hundreds, then thousands, hidden in the shadows of moons and drifting rocks. Satellites, sentinels, war beacons, all part of a system that had been asleep for 100 years, waiting for a specific command, and that command had just arrived. The first fleet casualty didn't come from an attack, it came from silence. The ship Aurelian's Pride stopped transmitting mid-sentence, the crew still laughing one moment, gone the next, their vessel drifting powerless, lights dead, no explosion, no distress signal, just quiet. Voron's command ship tried to hail them, but all they received was a low tone repeating through the comms, rhythmic, calm, almost like a voice breathing, "We offered peace." Voron's heart skipped. "Run a full system scan." He ordered, "Find the source." The officer's hands shook over the console. "Sir, it's everywhere." "What do you mean everywhere?" "The signal, it's bouncing through our systems. It's inside them." The fleet tried to recalibrate, but one by one, their lights dimmed, ships flickering like candles in the wind. The AI systems crashed first, followed by communications, then propulsion. Panic erupted, officers shouting over the static, "We're losing control. Power cycling offline. Something's rewriting the core." And through it all, the same voice echoed through every ship, calm and measured. "We offered peace." The voice wasn't synthetic, it wasn't digital. It was human, clear, warm, steady, and yet behind it, there was an ache, a sorrow that cut deeper than anger. A voice of someone who had forgiven long before they were ever asked to. Voron slammed his fist on the console, his voice trembling with fury and fear. "Who is this? Identify yourself." For a moment there was silence, and then, slowly, the reply came. "You came to remind us of war. We came to remind you why we left." The fleet's hull sensors detected something massive moving behind Mars, but when they turned their scanners toward it, the readings collapsed, every system reporting conflicting data. Some said it was an asteroid, others a ship larger than any ever recorded. But before they could agree, the stars blinked out, literally vanished, replaced by shadow, a blackness so absolute that the instruments registered it as the absence of space itself. "It's behind us," someone screamed. "What is that thing?" Voron turned toward the viewport, and froze. Out of the dark came light, faint lines of blue tracing across a structure so enormous that it defied reason. It wasn't a ship. It was a wall, a barrier of metal and silence that stretched across half the horizon. Its surface marked with a symbol the Council hadn't seen in 100 years. A silver circle divided by two lines, the mark of the Terran Accord. The voice returned, not from the comms this time, but from the air itself, vibrating through the hull. "You wanted to see if we were alive. We are." The fleet's engines flared, panic spreading through the ranks, captains shouting orders, crews begging for guidance, "Open fire." Someone yelled, but before the first missile could launch, every targeting system failed. The screens flooded with static, then cleared to show something that made even Voron's blood run cold. The faces of his own crew reflected back at him, projected across the glass, their eyes blank, their mouths moving in unison, whispering the same words, "We offered peace." The bridge lights dimmed to blood red, alarms wailing, the air growing thick with static discharge, "Reverse course." Voron shouted, "Get us out of here." But the navigation system was gone, replaced by a single message on every screen. You crossed the line between forgiveness and arrogance. And then the stars came back, not as stars, but as fire, hundreds of blue-white flares igniting across the void. Each one a Terran defense drone awakening from centuries of sleep. Their formation perfect, silent, unhurried. They didn't attack. They didn't need to. They just were, existing as a reminder that humanity's peace had always been guarded by power beyond comprehension. The fleet began to fracture, ships colliding as panic consumed the captains. We can't move. Something's draining our cores. Shut it down. Shut it all down. The voice came one last time. Softer now, like a sigh. We asked for peace. You answered with pride. Now you will learn silence. And just like that, every ship went dark. Thousands of vessels turned into lifeless metal drifting in the quiet. Their lights extinguished, their weapons cold, no explosion, no sound, only stillness. The same stillness that had once covered a galaxy when humanity had withdrawn. Back in the council chamber, light years away, the high speaker stared at the reports coming in, her hands shaking as she whispered, "Where are they?" No one answered. There were no distress calls, no signals, just the faint echo of a human voice repeating through the void, "We offered peace." And for the first time in living memory, the stars themselves felt afraid. The council chamber was a storm of chaos when the first reports arrived, aides shouting over one another, holograms flickering in and out, commanders screaming that contact had been lost with the entire Sol expedition. The high speaker stood frozen in the center of it all, her voice breaking as she demanded, "Status of the fleet." No one answered at first, because there was nothing to report, no wreckage, no debris, no signals, not even radiation traces. It was as if 2,000 ships had never existed. She turned toward Admiral Vora, her face pale, her tone trembling. They can't all be gone. Something must have survived. Vora's voice was low, almost a whisper. No, they didn't die, they were erased. The words made the air feel heavier, every sound dying in his shadow. How do you erase a fleet? Someone demanded, and Vora's eyes flicked toward the great screen above them, where the image of Earth still rotated in perfect calm. You don't. He said, unless the ones who built the stars themselves decided to remind us who they were. Silence spread across the hall like a sickness, the laughter and mockery from before now replaced by cold realization. The council delegates, once arrogant and loud, now sat motionless, eyes locked on the blue planet that had haunted them since the message first appeared. The high speaker forced herself to stand tall, gripping her staff so tightly her knuckles turned white. We must open the archives, she said, her voice almost breaking. Everything related to the Terran Accord, the war of silence, all restricted data, now. The archivists hesitated. Those files were sealed for a reason, locked away generations ago under penalty of death. But one look from her was enough, and the ancient records began to flicker to life, their screens dusty with age, their light revealing things the galaxy had chosen to forget. The first images were black and white, videos from the First War, recordings of human fleets gliding through the void, not with aggression, but precision, their ships dark and silent, their movements impossibly calm. One historian whispered. They didn't fight like soldiers, they moved like surgeons, another added. They didn't destroy worlds, they dissected them. The footage shifted, showing fleets surrendering, weapons powering down, soldiers throwing themselves to their knees. And then the Terrans simply leaving, no colonization, no occupation, just quiet departure, leaving behind nothing but silence and empty skies. One delegate, trembling, said, they didn't want war, they wanted order. And an older one beside him whispered back, no, they wanted peace, and they gave it to us the only way we understood, through fear. The next file made the room go cold, an ancient transmission from a council officer dated nearly 100 years ago. The voice was frantic, full of static. We begged them for help, the voice cried. And they came, they saved us. But when the fighting ended, they looked at us with eyes like gods and said, never call us again, then they vanished. The file ended with a note stamped in red. Terran contact, severed. The high speaker stared at it for a long time, her voice faint. They warned us, she said. They said silence was mercy, and we mocked them for it. She turned to Admiral Vora. What if they're back? Vora shook his head. No, they never left. They were just waiting for us to prove them right. In the corner of the chamber, a young aide gasped as new data appeared on the holoscreen. "Madam Speaker," he said, his voice shaking, "you need to see this." The image expanded, a live feed from the outer colonies, planets flickering as their power grids went offline one by one. No explosions, no invasions, just quiet darkness swallowing world after world. "It's not an attack," the aide whispered, "it's a shutdown." The realization rippled through the hall like a shockwave. The Terrans weren't destroying the galaxy, they were turning it off, one system at a time, deactivating weapons, silencing fleets, ending wars by taking away the tools that made them possible. And across every disabled network, the same phrase appeared: "We offered peace." The High Speaker sank into her seat, her hands shaking. "This can't be happening," she murmured. "How are they doing this?" The answer came from the historians, their voices grim. "Because every system we use was built with Terran code," one said, "even our ships, our energy grids, our communication networks. They gave us their technology after the First War. We rebuilt our civilization on their designs." Another added quietly, "They never gave us freedom, they gave us a leash." The words struck her like a blade to the heart, and for the first time, she saw it clearly. The humans had not abandoned the galaxy. They had built it, and then left it to see if it could survive without them, and it had failed. Reports kept flooding in. Entire fleets immobilized, empires cut off from communication. Trade worlds left dark and cold, no violence, no demands, only silence, and through it all, the human signal continued to pulse, slow and steady. "We offered peace." The message spread like an infection of conscience, not a command, not a threat, but a mirror, forcing every world to look upon itself and see what it had become. The speaker felt tears burn behind her eyes, not from fear, but from shame. "They tried to save us," she whispered, "and we made them leave." Outside the chamber, the great cities of the Council's capital began to dim, one by one, the lights of entire towers fading as Terran code reached even there. Citizens stepped out into the streets to watch the sky, and above them, where stars should have shone, they saw only one light remaining, a single blue dot glowing faintly in the distance, the symbol of Earth. In the dark halls of the Council, the High Speaker looked up at it and felt her breath catch. "What are they waiting for?" she asked quietly, and Admiral Vora's answer was almost too soft to hear, for us to listen. In the depths of space, between the disabled worlds and the silent fleets, the human network expanded, no ships, no armies, just light, spreading through the void like veins of memory, connecting every star, every system. The same way humanity once connected hearts across the stars. Their message repeated again, softer now, less like a warning, more like a whisper from an old friend who had once loved too deeply and been hurt too many times. "We offered peace." And across the galaxy, billions of voices fell silent, because for the first time in 100 years, everyone understood what those words truly meant. They were not an invitation. They were a verdict. The galaxy watched in silence as the lights continued to die, world after world dimming into shadow, trade routes gone dark, fleets adrift without power, entire empires brought to their knees not by war or fire, but by quiet hands that never even appeared, on the Council's capital world. The High Speaker stood before the great window of the tower that overlooked the endless sprawl of cities now faint and flickering. She had spent her life believing the galaxy had outgrown the chaos of the past, that their peace was their triumph. But now she saw that peace had been borrowed. Built on the mercy of those who had once offered it freely, she whispered to herself, "This is how they end wars, by ending everything that could cause them." Admiral Vora stood beside her, the reflection of Earth's blue glow flickering across his armor, his eyes distant. "They're not punishing us," he said softly, "they're reminding us." The Council met again, though the great chamber was half dark, emergency lights humming in the air. The delegates looked smaller now, shadows of the arrogance they once carried, their voices subdued. The speaker raised her hand for calm. "We need to understand what they want," she said. "They're dismantling our systems, yet they haven't harmed anyone. There must be something they're waiting for." The Dralith representative, once defiant, spoke with trembling claws. "Perhaps they're giving us time." "Time for what?" asked another. "To surrender." The question hung heavy, and no one dared answer, because surrender to humanity was not surrender to an empire. It was surrender to a truth too vast to fight. Admiral Vora finally broke the silence, his voice low. They're waiting for the last of us to stop pretending we ever understood peace. Across the stars, Terran transmissions grew clearer, the words no longer static but voices, layered upon one another. Human voices, calm, tired, beautiful, speaking in 1,000 languages long forgotten. They didn't threaten, didn't demand, they only reminded. We offered peace, and you answered with pride. We withdrew, hoping you would learn, and now you've repeated our history. The messages looped endlessly, spreading through the empty networks, lighting the dark like fireflies in the void. Children on distant colonies gathered around flickering holoscreens, listening to those soft voices from a world they'd never seen. One young girl turned to her mother and asked, "Are they gods?" Her mother, tears streaking her cheeks, shook her head. "No," she whispered, "they are what we were supposed to become." On one outer colony, an entire fleet of warships stood frozen above the planet's atmosphere, powerless. Their commanders huddled in dark control rooms lit only by emergency lamps. One captain stared out at the black sky where, moments before, thousands of stars had shone, now replaced by a single enormous symbol burning faintly in blue. The Terran circle divided by two lines, the mark of peace, of judgment, of memory. "Why won't they just destroy us?" someone asked in the dark, and the captain, an old soldier with scars across his face, answered softly, "Because destruction is easy, forgiveness is harder." The high speaker watched the reports pour in, no casualties, no battles, just silence. "They've shut down every weapon system across 6 sectors. One aide said, "Entire fleets are mobilized. They've halted all communication traffic," another added. "We can't even send distress calls." Yet even as fear gripped them, something else began to spread. Calm, in the quiet, planets began reaching out to one another by old means. Physical messengers, light beacons, spoken word, as if rediscovering what peace once truly was. The galaxy, once loud with greed and noise, was learning to whisper again, and every whisper carried the same question. What will humanity do next? Admiral Vora approached the central display, showing the vast map of the galaxy now threaded with pale blue lines marking Terran activity. "They've reached the core worlds," he said quietly, "and yet, they stop short each time." The speaker frowned. "Why?" Vora hesitated, his gaze distant. "Because they remember mercy, and mercy is their last weapon." She turned to him, her voice barely a breath. "Do you think they'll forgive us?" Vora looked at the blue world still glowing faintly on the screen. "They already did," he said. "That's why they warned us before." And then, as if to answer her unspoken thoughts, every system in the Council's network flickered one last time, and a hologram appeared in the center of the chamber, tall and clear, formed of light so bright it seemed to come from another time. It was a human figure, dressed not for war but for diplomacy, an ambassador of the old Terran Accord, his expression calm, his eyes kind yet ancient. When he spoke, his voice was not loud but it filled every corner of the hall. "We came in peace once," he said. "You called it weakness, you struck at us, and we showed you restraint. We waited while you rebuilt, hoping you would remember what peace costs." He looked around slowly, as if seeing every delegate across the stars. "You forgot." The hologram stepped forward, his tone changing, not angry, not cruel, but unbearably sorrowful. "We offered peace again, not because we wanted to rule, but because we wanted to forgive, yet you met us once more with arrogance and weapons. So now we show you the truth. You were never our enemies, you were our children, and we let you grow without guidance. This," he gestured toward the darkened galaxy, "is what you built in our absence." The chamber was silent except for the quiet sound of weeping. The speaker herself bowed her head, her tears catching the light. "What happens now?" she whispered. The hologram turned his gaze toward her. "Now you remember." The image faded, leaving behind only the symbol, glowing brighter than before, the blue circle of Earth turning slowly in the air, its light reflecting off every broken pride in that room. And for the first time since the galaxy was young, the Council fell completely silent, not out of fear, but reverence, as though they had just heard the voice of something greater than time itself, and far away, beyond their sight, in the black depths of Sol, a single Terran ship turned slowly toward the stars. Its engines whispering to life after 100 years, its destination unknown, its purpose simple, to watch, to guide, to remind. And as it vanished into the void, its message pulsed across the galaxy one final time, gentle as a heartbeat, sorrowful as memory. "We offered peace. The following days passed like a dream no one could wake from. The stars that once burned with life were now dim and watchful. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath, afraid to speak, afraid to move, afraid that even a whisper might draw the eyes of those who had gone silent yet never truly left. On the Council's homeworld, the great cities that once glittered with endless power now lay quiet beneath skies painted blue by the reflection of Earth's signal still pulsing in orbit. People gathered in the streets to stare upward, their faces pale and full of questions they could not ask. In the council chamber, the High Speaker sat surrounded by her advisors. Though they no longer felt like leaders, they looked like ghosts in a room of memory. "We've lost control of everything," one muttered. "Our fleets, our trade, our laws," another added. "It's over." But Vora stood at the far end of the table, his uniform torn, his eyes hollow yet bright with something that wasn't despair but understanding. "No," he said quietly, "it's not over, it's beginning again." The speaker turned toward him, her voice weary. "What do you mean beginning?" And Vora walked slowly toward the central holoscreen that still flickered with the emblem of Earth. "This isn't destruction, this is correction. They're not ending our worlds. They're restoring what we broke." He pointed at the map glowing faintly before them. "Look, they've shut down every military grid, every weaponized system. But they left the life support networks intact, agriculture stations still running, medical outposts untouched. They're dismantling the violence, not the people." The realization sank into the room like a storm. The aides looking at one another, their fear giving way to disbelief. "They're fixing us," one whispered, and another said bitterly. "Then what are we supposed to do? Thank them?" Vora looked at her sharply. "Maybe that's the first thing we should have done a century ago." His words hit harder than any threat. The speaker lowered her head, her fingers tracing the edge of her staff. "How do you apologize to a species that saved you from yourself?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How do you beg forgiveness from gods who never wanted to be gods at all?" Outside, through the towering glass of the council hall, the night sky shimmered as faint streaks of blue light cut across the horizon. Terran observation drones, silent as the void, passing over cities, scanning not for weapons but for stability. Their presence was neither cruel nor comforting. They simply watched, recording, waiting. The people below knelt in their glow, some in awe, others in guilt, praying to the humans as if they were celestial judges. And in a way, they were. Because humanity had become what the galaxy never could. Discipline born from mercy, wrath tempered by conscience. Far beyond the council world, at the edges of known space, the last remaining warlords gathered in secret, whispering of rebellion. Their fleets cobbled together from old technology that had not yet been silenced. "We won't kneel to Terrans," one growled. "They're just another empire hiding behind words." But as he spoke, his ship's lights flickered, the temperature dropped, and the viewing window filled with a reflection of a human face, calm, expressionless, eyes cold as starlight. "We offered peace," the voice said softly, and before anyone could react, every system shut down, leaving them in darkness, their screams unheard in the cold silence of the void. Back at the council, the speaker sat alone long after the others had left, the only sound the soft hum of her planet's failing generators. She opened the old archive files again, this time not out of fear, but out of sorrow, and watched the last recorded message sent from Earth before the Great Silence. It was an old human diplomat, his voice steady even as smoke and fire surrounded him. "If one day our words return to you," he said, "it will not be for vengeance. It will be to remind you that peace was a gift, and every gift, when refused, must be reclaimed." The video ended, and the speaker whispered into the quiet. "And now you've reclaimed it, haven't you?" Admiral Vora entered the room, the faint light reflecting off his face. "They're calling for you outside," he said softly. "The people want to hear something from the council." She gave a tired smile. "What can I say that will matter now?" He placed a hand on her shoulder. "The truth," he said, "that we were wrong, that they were right." Together they stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the plaza below, where thousands stood beneath the shimmering light of Terran drones. The speaker raised her voice, trembling but strong. "For 100 years, we feared the silence of humanity," she said, her words echoing across the city. "We thought it was weakness, we thought it was retreat, but today we understand. It was grace, it was restraint, it was mercy beyond our comprehension." She looked up at the sky, where Earth's faint blue signal still pulsed against the stars. "They offered peace, and we called it weakness. They showed mercy, and we called it fear. And now they've shown us the meaning of both. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. If they're listening, let them know this. We remember now, and we will not forget again. The crowd fell to its knees, tears glinting under the faint light of the drones above. And somewhere far across the galaxy, deep within the silent halls beneath Earth's surface, a transmission blinked across a console, reading only 3 words: acknowledged. We hear you. In that moment, something changed. The Terran network stopped expanding, the shutdowns ceased. The drones that had filled the skies began to drift upward, returning to the void from where they came. The hum of power slowly returned to the cities of the Council, lights flickering back to life, and a whisper spread across the stars. Perhaps humanity had forgiven them once more. Perhaps this was their answer, not vengeance, not conquest, but a reminder that peace was not silence. It was discipline. It was choice, it was mercy made eternal. And as the blue glow of Earth faded from the skies one last time, the High Speaker stood beneath the stars and whispered with tears in her eyes, "We offered peace. And for the first time in 100 years, the galaxy whispered back, and now, we accept." Months passed, and the galaxy was not the same. Gone were the banners of conquest, the endless meetings of empires, the fleets that once filled the void with their pride. What remained was silence, but not the cold silence of fear. The living silence of reflection, of rebuilding, of understanding. The Terran message had stopped weeks ago. Their light faded from the skies, their ships unseen, but their presence was felt everywhere. In the way worlds spoke softly now before raising their voices. In the way soldiers laid down their weapons. In the way entire civilizations looked toward the stars not with arrogance but humility. And in the quiet of the Council's capital, life began to move again, slow, careful, changed. The High Speaker no longer wore the golden robes of command. She stood without title now, dressed simply, her voice softer, wiser. She walked through the halls of the once grand council building, now a place of learning rather than ruling. She passed children studying the history of the galaxy, their screens showing the wars that once were, and beside them, a new chapter had been written, the silence of Earth, the lesson of peace. Her eyes filled with tears as she read those words, because for the first time in centuries, the story was not written by victors, it was written by survivors. Outside, the sky shimmered with strange new satellites, non-military, neutral constructs built jointly by every species, meant not to spy or control but to connect, to listen, to share. They called it the network of memory, designed in the same pattern as the Terran communication relays, not as mimicry but as tribute, and through it flowed messages of gratitude, of apology, of hope, across thousands of worlds. The people spoke of the humans not as monsters or gods, but as the bridge between what the galaxy was and what it could become. A mother on a colony world whispered to her child at night. The humans didn't leave us in darkness, they taught us to make our own light. In the ruins of the old war academies, soldiers turned into teachers, their classrooms filled with the children of those who had once fought. They told them about the day the fleets vanished, about the way silence fell like judgment. But they didn't tell it as a story of fear, they told it as salvation. They could have destroyed us, one veteran said to his students, his hands trembling. But instead, they chose to teach us what peace truly costs. He paused, looking at the faces before him. They showed us that mercy is not weakness, it's the hardest strength to carry. Far beyond the council world, in the deep uncharted dark, something stirred, a faint signal, soft and distant, a human voice, not speaking to command or threaten, but to comfort. To those who learned, it said, to those who listened, we thank you. The transmission spread like dawn across the galaxy, faint but clear. You are not our subjects, you are not our enemies. You are our legacy, the proof that peace can outlive its makers. And then, after a pause, one last message, we are returning. To our silence now, not because we've left you, but because you no longer need us. The message ended, the stars flickered, and then the transmission was gone. The speaker stood beneath that sky, tears streaking her face as she whispered to no one and everyone, "You were never gone, were you?" And she thought she could almost hear a reply, soft and distant, like an echo through time, "We never are." Admiral Vora joined her, his uniform faded but his eyes alive with quiet pride. "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" he asked. She looked at him and smiled faintly, "Maybe not with our eyes, but maybe with what we become." They stood there in silence, watching the night, and for the first time, The silence didn't feel empty, it felt sacred. Years later, when historians wrote of that era, they would call it the Age of Grace, the time when humanity vanished into legend once more, leaving behind no empire, no monuments, only the memory of mercy that reshaped the stars. The galaxy thrived, united not by laws but by understanding, and on the oldest world of all, Earth, deep beneath its quiet oceans, a single beacon pulsed once every year, a heartbeat in the dark, carrying the same message that had once shattered the arrogance of 1,000 worlds. We offered peace. And somewhere, perhaps beyond the edges of known space, where human eyes still watched the stars, another voice would always answer, and at last, they listened.